All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a very timely topic to discuss. The changes post the NAR settlement are now in effect, and the agents' behaviors, the home buyers' behaviors, and all that now need to change as per the new laws, the new documents, the new contracts. So we're going to cover quite a bit of ground today. I've collapsed them into three different topics. Briefly, why they changed, how things used to work, and now what to expect when you engage in the home buying market. Hopefully, we can be clear and concise in this whole process, such that when you begin to look for a home, it'll all make sense, or at least you'll have some resources to reach out to get some assistance. So, with that, I'll bring on our co-host Chase Hodgson. How you doing today, Chase?
I'm good, Jerod. How are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Good, good.
Just rolling with the punches with these new these new changes in our industry now that they're in effect.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Lots to talk about. I know it's interesting. Lending went through this, post '08, so I definitely feel the pain and know there's a lot of changes in your world for sure.
Yeah, until things just settle in and we know what that new process looks like, how to communicate, what paperwork to use, and all that. Just the initial kind of the bumps in the road get are a little uncomfortable, a little uneasy. So hopefully we can, dispel some myths. We can tell people what to expect, and maybe even elevate the game of some agents out there to how to better communicate what's really going on in our industry. So, but with that, let me do some real quick housekeeping items here. We do want to chat briefly about our sponsor for today, and that's Perfect Home Buying Process. Specifically with these NAR settlements, is yet another example of how we want to make the home buying process seamless, as seamless as possible. Just bring a lot of tools, a lot of resources to the table with relocation guides, reports for those that are data driven. We want to share industry secrets so you get some insider information. And then weekly podcast series that'll answer a lot, and hopefully all the questions that you might have. We are working with Chase in regards to getting you up to $500 on your appraisal and up to $500 on your home inspection at closing to help build some confidence in the home buying process while bringing down your overall costs. So if you have any questions about what this looks like, please feel free to reach out. But yeah, like you said, Chase, this is a change that we're now seeing. Not that yours was the same, but you had a very significant change not too many years ago, and not everybody's, I would assume, now comfortable with the now new process.
Yeah, yeah, really just because, like you kind of said it, it's settling in and realizing what the new norm is.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the business changes for sure, and I do see the majority of this is positive changes for your industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think that whatever industry you're in, right? Like, yeah, when there's when there's the ability to make a good living, a decent sum of money,
Mm-hmm.
um, I believe that there needs to be a higher standard set, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's barriers to entry, more skill at the position, like we're not doctors, and we're for sure, but when you have to add value, right? You have to add and retain value in what you do, and there is a ton of value in having an agent, because and we've talked about this ad nauseum, right? Like people just do not realize how important it is to have an agent and all the legalities in buying and selling real estate.
Yeah.
And so, whatever you feel about the agent's commissions, that value is there, and they need to protect their industry, in my opinion. And this actually helps that in a
Mm-hmm.
couple of different ways, right? Whether it's that barrier to entry, people maintaining licenses for the one or two transactions of a family member that they get when, you know, they're not really going to go out and do this full time. It might help rid some of that stuff. And then the other thing is just getting better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, and this is the funny part to me. Honestly, the commissions were always negotiable.
Yep.
right? It's just all that's really changed is that accepted norm of just putting it in the contract,
Yeah.
right? And it's so now, a buyer's agent is forced to negotiate their commission with the listing agent and the seller.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really all it is.
Yeah, no, and I love the fact that you brought that up because as a listing agent, when you're helping somebody sell their home, obviously you have to be very clear, very concise, very articulate in how it is that you're going to, list, sell, market, negotiate, the sale of their home, and you have a plan for all of that, and
Yep.
quite often it's a competitive situation, and you have to, the bar is raised by virtue of a competitive landscape and
Right.
defining the process of what that looks like, right? If you told somebody I'm just going to put an MLS with some photos on it, you're probably not going to get the business.
Right.
um, but
We're not in that market anymore.
right, right. But on the buyer's agent side, so if you're a buyer and you have representation, by the way, by virtue of how things worked, you didn't necessarily have to articulate what your value add to the buyer is. What are my
Right.
negotiating skills? What is my experience in the industry? Do I know the area? The tools that we provide, for you in the perfect home buying process. You didn't. There wasn't the need. And then I'll get on to our slide topics here, but this is a good way to set the stage for what we're going to talk about because it is now important because it's going to become front and center that the buyer is ultimately paying the buyer's agent for their commissions. And it used to be, well, I'll go to the first slide so we can kind of walk through it a little bit better. But let me talk about the decoupling a little bit. So in a co-broker arrangement in the past, the commission was paid by the seller to the listing office. So if I was helping somebody sell their home, whatever that negotiated, and that's the operative word here, negotiated commission for both the listing of the home and the representation of the buyer, the seller, that would be pre-negotiated and apparent to a buyer's agent. So now, post NAR settlement, we're going to decouple the listing agent commission with the buyer's agent commission, and the buyer is now going to be responsible to the buyer's agent for their part of their commission. And we'll get to what a good buyer's agent can do to help get in part or all of that commission from the seller. But because they're decoupled, it's going to be very important for a buyer's agent to communicate what their value add services are to that buyer. So,
Agreed.
a lot to say. The bar is being raised. It just has to be by virtue of how we do business today.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately that's good for the industry, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have, because there are, you want people to take their job seriously, right? Like this, we talk about it a lot. This is the the biggest purchase that 99% of the population is going to make. And so you want to make sure that you have good vested, educated and experienced help in that transaction.
Yeah. So hopefully, we've done podcasts in the past talking in more detail about why things changed, what happened in the NAR settlement, the things that they're trying to clear up. But I don't, we can certainly direct you to those prior podcasts if you want more detail on that. But really, I just wanted to talk about the decoupling because I think that's what's important here. And then prior to that, what's that?
I don't know. When you think about the reality of it, it's just interesting what they decide to pick on, right? Like,
Yeah.
they went after him for price fixing, is what it was, right?
Yep.
Because that is negotiated anymore. It's just written into a lot of contracts. No matter what the verbiage of the contract is, it was just a generally accepted principle is not necessarily price fixing, right?
Right.
It's interesting that each one of our smartphones all cost $1,000, no matter which company you go to, but that's not price fixing.
Right. Yeah.
It's always interesting what they decide to pick on for the day.
Yeah. I get, how, potentially how we got here, because it was handled in a co-brokering arrangement where if you weren't clear and concise about the fact that the seller was paying for the listing commission, and then that listing agent was ultimately going to pay the buyer's agent, and that both of those two commissions were negotiable. Um, so, so I could see why it either might be confusing or not talked about in enough detail that there was an
Yeah.
incorrect perception in the industry. So that decoupling now makes it become front and center. You're going to talk about both topics. The seller's going to talk about the listing commission with the seller or with the listing agent, and the buyer is going to talk to the buyer's agent about the commission to the buyer's agent. They're two different topics.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And
And I do believe the benefit will be great both for the industry and for the buyers and sellers. But it's funny little things like that you think about all the I don't know. And it was different in other states, right? Like in Idaho, the way the contract was written, like technically, we were doing things right, and the conversations weren't necessarily being had to the depth they should have been. Um, but there are other states where the contracts didn't really describe how that was supposed to work.
yeah, and that's a really good point, Chase, because now in Idaho specifically, and I'm sure there were some other states that were good about making that more clear than others. The lawsuit came out of Missouri, so however
Mhm.
they practiced real estate there might have been a little more confusing, whatever the case might be. But it
Yeah,
is good to note here because some of the now new documentation that we have in Idaho just looks repetitive. You're
yeah,
like, well, I just signed that said that, and now you're asking me to sign this that says the same thing. Like, yeah, but that's because we had that document before, and now
right,
we're required to have yet another additional document that if it wasn't clear before, it is clear now.
right,
So,
right. And but now you're just starting to look like the lending side with all the redundancies.
yeah, you wonder why your stack of paper at closing is this high, and you got to, you
I'll
know,
say the same thing. It's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. When you promised this earlier, well, you're promising it again. It actually, at title, it is kind of funny because there's that chuckle when
Yeah,
they say that. It's like, hey, this is the same form as the one you just.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, yeah. I'm such a fan of our government being involved in all these transactions.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with all of that, but I think the bigger overarching point, and you hit the nail on the head, is now the bar is going to be raised. We have to be more detailed. There's more documentation that says how this works, more opportunity for the consumer to ask questions, to get information. But the way that they approach how you buy a home today is going to be significantly different. So let's talk about that.
Yeah,
Um, so the most immediate difference you're going to notice is you can't just uh, engage with a buyer's agent and say, I want to go see this house. We are
hmm,
now required by law to have an agreement of representation to show you a home. In the past, we were obligated to give you what's called a blue brochure, an agency disclosure here in Idaho. It was a non-committal thing, but just spelled out the differences, nuances between the client and a customer. But there was no representation agreement. Now we have to have some level of agreement, and you need to know what those differences are. Some are as loose as a single page, one day, one property, easily cancelable document. Um, so that's about as non-threatening as you get, but keeps um, the the buyer's agent, you know, um, doing things as they should in the industry. Or you can be asked to sign what's called a full buyer's representation agreement for a period of time for multiple properties, different types of properties, and it's a lengthier document. Obviously, a buyer's agent would prefer to know that you as a buyer are committed to them in the process of buying a home, that as they're bringing properties to you, as they're taking you to properties, as they're engaging with listing agents. So it's important for you as a buyer to determine what your level of relationship with this buyer's agent is.
Yeah.
do I know them well enough to not just do the single page, a easily cancelable single site, agreement, or am I going, if I talk to them enough, do I know enough about them to get into, my ask is a 6 month, it's going to take us about 6 months to get you as a homeowner through the process.
Yeah, and listening to you explain that, I can see that, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this, but I can see that being a little bit of an out for the less experienced, less confident
You know,
agents to not have to ask the hard questions, right? To not really do their job as a salesperson.
Yes and no. So here's what'll happen is, and it depends on how you engaged with the real estate agent, right? We've talked about this before. Now there's a lot of lead generation systems.
Mhm.
And, honestly, I've used them. You'll get a call and somebody will say, yeah, 123 Main Street, I want to go see this house. And it's a warm handoff of a phone from, let's say, realtor.com, Zillow, or what have you, because they don't have agents in the field. So they enlist the help of licensed agents in each state.
Right.
So for me to show up at 123 Main Street to help this buyer that I've had a 5, 10, maybe 15-minute conversation on and say, hey, please sign this multi-page buyer representation agreement, committing to me that I am your agent. And by the way, I'm going to communicate to you what my commission is in that process. You see how that could be very threatening for a very,
I hadn't thought about it in terms of the lead gen sites. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That's actually a good use of it, as long as it doesn't bleed into an out for people. And because I think it goes back to adding value to your job,
mm-hmm,
right? And retaining that value um, is no, like my time is worth something.
yeah.
And if we're going to spend time doing this, then we need to be in an agreement on how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is that conversation that you're going to have with the agent the agent with their buyer. Obviously, if you've been working with the buyer for a while and you've just chatted over the phone, before you get out there, you're going to have some document um,
Yeah.
executed, and if you know them enough, that won't be an issue. But again, if you just had that warm handoff phone call, 5-10 minute conversation, you don't want to go there. But what I'm leading up to is for agents that haven't operated in a professional manner, that can't articulate what it is they do as a buyer's agent, um, to talk them through the traditional buyer's representation agreement is going to be difficult for them.
Yeah.
They haven't had to do it per se before, because it would have been easy to say, when you submit the offer, I'll have to have this on file at my brokerage. But you've already, seen multiple properties, you have multiple conversations, and you know, that's kind of after the fact. Where now it's the first meeting that you're going to have on a property. So what I'm saying is, if you're not a professional agent and you're just asking for that single page, you're going to do a lot of that and go nowhere,
Yeah.
because the buyers are going to go, why am I going to sign something where I'm committed to you when I don't even know you and you can't tell me what you're going to do for me?
Hmm.
And that's going to get old very quickly. Um,
Yeah.
I would certainly approach a buyer that came to me through a lead gen system with that single page agreement, because I wouldn't expect that they could understand the full gamut of spectrum of my services that quickly. And I would say, hey, this is what it's signed today, so we can get you into the home, so that I am, operating in the capacity that I'm legally obligated to. But very quickly, I want to spend some time talking to you about a full representation agreement.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No. Absolutely. So it's really of knowing when to use that short form, right?
yeah,
Uh, and how it should be used, and not just always defaulting to that to reduce the pressure between you and your client.
yeah. Yeah, and the other part that I'm leading up to is, you as a buyer knowing what to ask when they
Hmm.
do present you with the more longer term committed buyer's representation agreement, because in there, we as agents could previously state that you as a buyer are not obligated to commission. We could put a 0 in that representation agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So it was non-threatening, because in our multiple listing service, we could look at a listing and the seller had already committed to that commission to the buyer's agent. And
Yeah.
so the listing agent shared that, the buyer's agent shared that, and there was already that documented committed commission. And
Yeah.
you didn't necessarily have to have that conversation, that potentially uncomfortable conversation with the buyer's agent about how much do I get out of your process of buying this house.
Right.
Now, in that representation agreement, I'm going to talk to you as a buyer about what my commission looks like. Now, downstream, I am going to go to the seller in a lot of cases, if not every case, to say, you as a seller, what are you committing to in the way of a seller concession to a buyer that buys your home? Okay.
Yeah.
It's handled differently, and the monies that are paid by the seller don't immediately go to the listing agent's office and then split to the agents.
Right.
You will, as a seller, you have made a commitment to the listing agent for their commission, and then as another process, you've committed to a seller concession that you're going to pay to the buyer. Then the
Right.
buyer is going to pay the commission to the buyer's agent. So I hope that's clear. But what your takeaway needs to be is that commission that is on that buyer's rep, you want to have that discussion with your buyer's agent about how they're earning that.
Yeah. And the rub is that a lot of times when you get a client, you haven't looked at houses yet. You don't have a specific one identified, and you don't know that that seller is going to give a concession so that's where the conversation has changed, right?
Yes.
You have to negotiate that as a buyer's rep prior to, in a lot of instances anyway, prior to, knowing whether they will commit to any kind of commission or not. So is your buyer willing to, to pay your commission?
Yeah. Well, you brought up a really good point. So I'll just put it out here now. If I work with a buyer, my commission, my services are 3% to help that buyer find a home, negotiate a home, secure a home, close on a home. Now, the seller, if a buyer says, can we go look at this home? I now, because I can't just look at MLS, I'm going to reach out to the listing agent and say, is your seller committed to providing a seller concession to the buyer? And I'm trying to use my words very specifically here.
Right.
And by the way, what is that percentage?
Yeah.
Because if I've told my buyer I work for 3%, I call reach out to the listing agent and they say the seller's committed to 2%. Okay. There's a couple of ways that can play out. The seller could certainly pay the 2% that they're committed to the buyer, and then the buyer could then also make up the difference of the 1%. So that is a thing. Some buyers will want to do that, and others maybe won't and can't. So you have to figure that out. So the only thing I don't particularly like in this whole process, I like the fact that we're going to raise the bar, we're going to be more professional, things are going to be decoupled, things are going to be much more clear.
Yeah.
What I don't like is now that the buyers are now thrust into the middle of this conversation about what the buyer's agent commission is.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, so it's always been I've liked the philosophy behind it. It's always kind of a pay it forward situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you bought a house, the seller paid the commissions. There's a lot of costs. There's much more costs on the buyer side than the seller side, right? The seller closing costs are much less. than the buyers, especially when you're considering down payment and all the things that go into that, which make it more difficult. And then now you stack on top of that how much the majority of the markets around the nation have increased in your base housing pricing. I mean, that's a lot to swallow for a buyer.
Yeah.
And so they got to worry about, geez, like if like maybe I'll go, and this is probably my biggest fear in the situation is, well, maybe now I'll just go this alone to save that cost, not knowing, what the ramifications could be for, missing items on a contract that they don't know to look for, missing closing dates,
What are
losing,
commissions, or excuse me, what are contingencies? How do
yeah,
contingencies get
all
cleared?
of
When is
that.
my earnest money in jeopardy? All that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's probably my biggest fear is because we want to protect our buyers. We want a good, healthy market. Um, and they need representation.
Yes.
Very few people really know, the majority of home buyers don't do it often enough to get comfortable with all the things that go into it.
Yeah.
Right. And all
We,
the legalities surrounding it.
yeah. Well, even if you've done it multiple times, it may not be in the same state, in the same way, in the same, in a similar market. The market might be drastically different. The
Five
laws
to
in each
seven
state.
years apart, what's changed, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess what I would do is back up a little bit and just encourage you as the buyer to not get overwhelmed with the details that we're talking about here. Just know that working with a good agent that is communicating to you what the commissions are and how what the options are around the commissions and how they're going to play out is going to be instrumental, just required. It's
Yeah. Frankly, and not to, I think it's this way in every industry. Some people just, you know, shouldn't be doing the job, not to run anybody down, but we all have different skill sets and everything. And if your agent is not having those conversations with you right up front,
mm-hmm.
then maybe you need to move on.
Yeah.
Right? Like you need, like there's in today's market, you don't want to mince and get into contract, time and then start having that conversation. That needs to be done up front in a proper manner so that our buyers are educated and know what to look for.
Yeah. Yeah, there are more stopping points in the process now where I think before, it could be very easy to, meet see a property, meet an agent, sign documents, and then boom, you're in escrow and you're off to the races, which, made things flow very quickly. There's going to be more topics of conversation now and stopping points, which I think is good because my approach to real estate is I'm an over communicator, and I'll tell my clients up front, I was like, if anything is going to bother you about working with me, potentially it's over communicating, because I know that I do that because I know the importance of communication in life, especially in this home purchase process. And I'll try to feather that, but just know I'll lean on the side of over communicating.
Right.
So now there's yet other times in this conversation that we're going to reiterate something, that we're going to restate and address these topics. But my point is, and again, I don't want to scare buyers out there, but ultimately the buyer's agent commission is coming from you, the buyer.
Yeah.
A good buyer's agent needs to be able to help you identify the homes that match your needs. If you are not a buyer that can afford the down, the closing cost, the inspection cost, the appraisal fees, and then also shoulder all or a percentage of the buyer's agent commission, that's fine, but your buyer's agent needs to be able to go get that commission that you're otherwise obligated to from the seller.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
An agent can't present to you 10 if you can't afford any buyer's agent commission and your buyer's agent's at 3%, they need to show you homes where the seller has committed to paying for 3%.
Yeah, which and I'm kind of biased, and I think it's always should have been this way. It used to be this way. It's kind of switched to where people are often deep in talks with a realtor before even speaking with a lender. But even more so now, it's more important to have those conversations up front and have a good team of a lender and an agent that can work together and say, okay, this is, the lender does his or her job, and then to the realtor, this is what they can afford. This is what we need to try and get concessions. This is and structure that deal out to help the realtor understand and know what they need to negotiate for. Because if you're not meeting with a lender and finding out, then the best realtor in the world they aren't going to know,
Yeah.
how to negotiate on your behalf.
Yeah, Chase, that's such a good point because there's a little bit of confusion here in that in Idaho, it used to be illegal to negotiate, and we're not used to. It was illegal to negotiate your commission during the middle of a transaction.
Hmm.
Now, the commission for the buyer's agents a line item in the purchase and sale agreement in the offer. So,
A little contradictory.
well, okay. So I say that, but we've always had the ability to negotiate. And I'm addressing your prior comment. I, as a buyer's agent, need to work with you as the lender and the client to determine what our offer looks like.
Yeah.
Because the forums have, I don't know about always, but for a long time have had how we as buyer's agents can help negotiate some of your costs, and not your costs, Chase, but the closing costs, because the seller can pay for closing costs in the purchase and sale agreement. So if the buyer hasn't talked with you to determine what those costs are, they're down, what monies they have in their pocket to take out to buy this home. I don't know what to put in the offer to say, hey, this buyer needs this much help with closing costs.
Right.
So once you do work with them, give them a budget, purchase price, get how much help we need to eliminate some out-of-pocket costs. Now I can put in there, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this buyer needs this much of a contribution towards them buying the house in order to, towards their closing costs to buy the house. So that was a lot to say. Your buyer's agent absolutely needs to be able to negotiate, because they're not only negotiating the things they used to, the purchase price, the closing time, the terms, the title company, all the things in a purchase and sale agreement that also should have included potentially the closing costs, but now the buyer's agent commission as well.
Right.
So that's all, needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and it's a chunk. Like it's super important to have all this stuff done up front. And yeah, like to your point, the communication, right? You're better off to over communicate than and get them sick of hearing from you, but know that they're protected through the transaction.
Yeah, and this. I'll keep this fairly short because I don't even know. It just seems I'm bringing it up because it seems interesting timing. But I've recently questioned the amount that I communicate, because I thought, man, are my clients just getting sick of hearing Jerod talk? Because I say things, and I know people have to hear things. I know a couple things multiple times. I do, to really get it, and in multiple ways. And some people get it the first time and then they're just annoyed after that. So anyway, I've questioned that, but I got an amazing review from some clients. I didn't even solicit the review, and they just hit the nail on the head about being so appreciative of my communication. So it validated that this level of communication is necessary. And these are people that have bought many homes in many states. So I'm just encouraging agents to overshare, to over communicate, especially now, because there's just a lot.
It's a complicated process. It always has been, right? Like, half the time I don't know why the government has the guidelines that they do on my side, right? Like, and so if I do this every day and I can get confused, right? How do you think the buyers and sellers feel? So yeah, why not? Why not over communicate? And I am like you and I have had this talk a number of times, but we're, old school salespeople. We've been doing this for a really long time, and we grew up in a different era when customer service was at a different level. And we've seen that ebb and flow as things become more automated and, and computerized. But I don't know how this can change, right now, right? Like like we, if anything, we have to get more so into that customer service and hand holding, and because yeah, these changes just make it even more confusing for our clients.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that popped into my head as you were talking there, and one is I had a broker, he's just a talented guy, but one of the things he said many years ago is, "This is a relational business, and it always will be."
Hmm.
And I've watched the industry try to transactionalize this business, automated computer stuff, multiple people in different positions and no real, one throat to choke, or you know what I mean, just
Hmm.
shuffling people through the process. Again, we've talked about this ad nauseum. We're relational. We want repeat and referral business, and we accomplish that by far exceeding our clients' expectations, not just going out and finding another name, another number to push through the system. And it was, we're customer service people, not salespeople, in my opinion.
Right.
And customer service is a lost art, but it sounds goofy for us to say I'm in customer service,
Yeah.
so we don't. But
But
to,
it, but that's what we're doing, right? We're serving, our clients, and guiding them, right? Like, I don't know. It's always better to educate than to sell.
yeah, yeah. But what I
Like,
was, go ahead. What do you say?
no, go. Yeah, I'm good.
But what I was coming back around to was to your point that this now creates yet another obvious opportunity in the relationship to be customer service oriented, to talk about
Yeah.
the ins and outs of what's going on here. And, you know, it, it, it has to be communicated. It just isn't an email that somebody could easily disregard. It isn't a document somebody can just easily rubber stamp without potentially getting themselves into, a bad situation. Oh, I didn't know I was on the hook to pay that buyer's agent, a commission, 2%, 3%, or whatever. You got to know what you're getting into and what that means to you. And then, back to hopefully, your agent knows what you can and can't do, and then how to best negotiate with sellers to help you accomplish your objectives, because that isn't all spelled out anymore up front.
Right. Right. And that's, and again, it goes back to the team of everybody, right? Like, what can they do? What are some options if, we aren't going to get the commissions? Like, how do we make sure that the realtors are protected? I know that my team, we've already put all that together. We know what that looks like. We know how to help protect the realtors. I've talked to dozens of builders in the valley. Like, here's the thing, and this is kind of what I always go back to. I've been, in and around construction my whole life, and that relationship between builder and realtor has always been a little bit contentious, right? Um, Builders are just a different mindset a little bit, but when I speak to a dozen builders and they're all saying and coming out publicly saying, no, 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 we want all the agents to know that we will be paying their, offering concessions for buyer commissions and stuff like that. Like, vocally saying that, to me, that says a lot, because nobody pays more commissions, right, than builders do.
Right. They're selling multiple homes,
Right.
tens,
All the
hundreds,
time. Always something on
sometimes
the
more.
market.
Yeah.
Right. And so if they're saying, that this is what we're doing because they are important to these transactions, then I mean, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
I mean, that right there tells you where the value is,
Yeah.
with having a good buyer's rep.
Yeah, well, your comment about the team thing brought up another topic that I was hopefully we could chat about, and that is, if you are being asked by a buyer's agent to sign a buyer's representation agreement, there's the things we've talked about in prior podcasts that I think is still of the utmost importance is identifying as quickly as you can who this is about. If you get the sense that this home purchase is about the buyer's agent, move on, because it needs to be about you and
Yeah.
your home buying in your way, in your time. So, I always tell my clients, my pace is your pace. So what I would say is, if you're hesitant about getting into that commitment, because some agents are really going to hold you to that commitment, you signed a buyer's rep agreement, and now I'm the one that's going to get a commission for you buying a home. So know where their heart is, when they're buying the home. Know what their experience is so that they can help you. How long have you known the area? If I'm buying a new construction home, do you know about them? Do you know how to negotiate? Do you know how contingencies work and how earnest money can be in jeopardy? Like, ask those things. But when you said team, there's one thing I wanted to point out. It certainly, you can ask an agent, how long have you been in the business? But the more important is, how many homes have you helped people buy? Because, if you've been in the business for 10 years and you've helped 3 people buy a home, and that was 5 years ago, that's not very helpful.
Yeah. I guess a lot of folks don't know that there are agents that specialize in one side or the other,
Yeah.
right? And the more transactions that you do, whether you're listing a home or buying a home, knowing that split with the agent that you work with is really important, because there's different skill sets that go into both sides,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I started my career in new construction because of my architectural design degree background. And I was blessed to learn a lot about new construction. But then I obviously had to learn resell and
Right.
the nuances there. So yeah, to your point, we definitely want to find out how that buyer's agent is uniquely qualified to help you.
Yeah.
Now, I won't dismiss a newer agent. That I think if their heart's in the right spot and they have a broker or a team lead or somebody that's very close to them and guiding them, I think you can feel comfortable there as well.
Yeah.
If they can't tell you, I'm blessed to have helped dozens and dozens of people buy and sell, but not every agent's going to have that. And if you ask that, I wouldn't dismiss them, but I would say, do you have a team lead? Do you have a broker? Do you work closely with them, to get through the process?
We all started in the industry at some point in time, right? Like, it's same for me. Like, there were at one point that I had done 0 loans,
Right.
right? And I'm out here trying to get people to let me help them with a loan. And the conversation was always, my team has 40 plus years of experience in
There you go.
the mortgage industry, right?
Yeah.
Like, so as new agents coming on, put yourself in that situation, right, where their experience and their credibility is your credibility, and not just the credibility factor, but make sure the training's there and the help's there, so that you can put their expertise to use in your new career.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So again, the 3 things, and maybe there's a 4th there, but it's, where is the agent's heart? What is the agent's experience and or access to experience? And then, do they have a good database? We've talked about this in prior podcasts. Do they have the databases of homes to go to find the seller concession that I'm going to need in my process of buying my home? So
Yeah.
we've talked about that we're building not only a database of home assumptions. We've talked about that, right? How you can get to the 3%, 4%, 5% commissions through loan assumptions, but also who are the sellers that are committed to offering you as a buyer some concession to help with the commissions on the buyer's agent side.
And it's, for buyers out there, you don't want to think, oh, this is a new thing only to get to get agents paid, because this has actually been prevalent in our industry for a long time. There's a lot of reasons that buyers need concessions.
Yeah.
And so don't think that, oh, this is new, this is going to affect my home buying. No, we've been putting these deals together and getting people in homes by using seller concessions for a really long time. So it's not all that new. It's now the buyer is educated on it, and they'll know what they need.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a good point here, Chase, in that they need to work with you, because depending on the loan type, that loan type needs to make sure that the seller concession that you're asking for is qualified, right?
Yeah.
Depending on, your buyer, what loan type they have, how much they're putting down, other extenuating circumstances, or anyway, I don't know the quite word I'm looking for,
Yeah,
but
no, you're right. Different loans offer different percentages of seller concessions, and so knowing, making sure you're with a lender that knows those differences and knows how to set you up and put the best possible foot forward. Luckily, the governing bodies have come out, and any concessions towards a buyer's agent are not being counted towards the total concession. So that's a benefit. But again, like it's just like the agents in the industry, they're going through changes. Well, um, this is a big one and it's a public one,
yeah.
but it's not the first change in their industry, and so it is with lending. Like every year guidelines change, things change that you have to address. So being with an educated expert in their industry is really important, so that they're up on all those changes and know how to best represent you.
Yeah, and that's why I'm making a case for an experienced LO like yourself, loan originator, and that if you're not experienced and you just quick and dirty put some numbers out there, give them to me as the agent, I put them into the offer because these are the numbers that I think that the buyer needs, just to find out that they missed something and they're disallowed from getting that much from the seller, right? Because the numbers we've been working with in the past, we still had to monitor. And now, if you're asking for yet an even bigger number in the way of a seller concession because of the buyer's agent commission, you could far exceed the allowable seller concession. And now
Yep.
you're mid, home purchase and could have missed
Have you
something.
risked have you risked the earnest money? Have you, yeah. There's a lot that goes into it, and I think, and probably the last point that I'll make here on the subject, but because I know that we're so like-minded and we work from the same place, a lot of this can cause what's best for the buyer to get lost in the
Mm-hmm.
shuffle, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's, working with people that are always going to have your best interest at heart, no matter whether it's, I can qualify you for way more than you want to pay, understanding what you're comfortable with in a payment, for your family, under what needs you need in a home, in the communities, in the schools. Like all of those things cannot get lost, because it's still what you need as a buyer, and what works for your family is still the most important aspect of the transaction.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we as usual have blown right by our half an hour, but I think that's a great place to stop.
Gosh,
To
really buy it. That's awesome. Great conversation, Jared.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping there's a lot for folks to take away from here. A lot of details, a lot of things to think about. But just know you've got what was that one company? You've got a friend in the business. It wasn't real estate, but anyway. I probably just dated myself, but.
I thought you were going Toy Story, man. You got a friend in me.
I guess I could have tried to go there because then I could remember where that reference came from. But anyway, well, good stuff, Chase. Again, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for co-hosting this. Thanks for your input on from
Always.
your side of the of the fence. And I guess we'll just wish everybody a blessed one. Thanks,
Absolutely.
guys.